Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Dr. Edward Marchewka. Dr. Fred Kwong couldn't make it this morning, so it's just going to be me, and hopefully that's okay with you. We're going to cover IT governance and information security and how they map. I'm going to tell some stories, and hopefully that resonates with you. Just for a high-level agenda, do a quick intro, a little background on myself and who I am. Just cover some definitions. This way we've got some baselining, and then bringing governance and InfoSec together with some actual applications. Talk about the what's in it for me conversation, and then having that discussion about business terms, which is so often used in this industry of you need to speak in business terms, but that's actually not defined in the literature at all. And then bringing it all together at just at the end of the day, what does this all look like and what does this mean? Please ask questions along the way. So a little bit about me. So I've been in the IT industry and InfoSec space for 20 plus years. Currently, I'm the CIO for Prior Health and the founder and principal consultant for 3LC Solutions. Just general disclaimer, opinions, thoughts, things that I say today are mine and not that of any of my employers. Went to school a whole bunch. I did my doctorate at California Southern University and a couple other programs over the course of my career. I've taken a few tests, as you can see, and I've got them listed out here. Just a little bit of credibility about myself, where I've been. Back to the formal education, I did my dissertation in cybersecurity risk communications. So this is a space that I really enjoy and thrive in. I've done a lot of reading in this area and happy to address questions or concerns as we dive into that and the marriage of the two, of governance and InfoSec. Dr. Kwong couldn't make it today, but just for background, and please connect with him. He's a great guy. He's currently the CISO for DeVry University. He's been in the industry just as long as I have, if not longer. He did his PhD from Benedictine University in org psychology. He's taken a few tests too. So let's jump into this. So I really wanted to start off with definitions because sometimes it's a bit vague of what you mean by this. And I like this one from Gartner, where IT governance is just the processes to make sure that IT is delivering value to the organization. Without any sort of governance and rules, things can go off the rails, and it ensures that we're using the resources accurately. In fact, at my new org with Prior Health, they brought me in for some IT governance type of work because they've been growing rapidly and needed that direction and those guardrails to help steer the organization to ensure efficiency. It's great when you're a startup and you buy devices and it becomes a bit ad hoc, but then as you grow, that technical debt can grow if things aren't more streamlined. And so governance really helps provide that direction, those guardrails, those rules that allows you to operate efficiently and effectively. Now, InfoSec, I went with the Oxford Dictionary definition because it is so broad, so vague. It can mean a whole bunch of things. And then there's the debate between information security and cybersecurity, and what does that mean, and what's the difference between the two, and really should we call it, should we take the information piece out of it because it makes it too closely related to IT? Should it be more data security, or should it be, is it really cyber? Throughout my dissertation, I used cyber security, not because I liked it, but because that's the vernacular that's used in the literature when it comes to this field. So we're just going to go take it with the state of being protected against criminal and unauthorized use of data and measures to achieve that. You use your definition. This is one we're going to use for today. It's protecting information, and Some will say though that it's going into risk management. Information security should be about risk management, presenting risk to the organization and tying that back to IT governance. One pitfall of perhaps this topic is the fact that IT governance and information security are being talked about in the same vein. And I think that goes to an article that I contributed to a while ago about where the CISO should sit. And, a lot of times information security or the CISO reports to the CIO. And, should they report to the CIO? In general, I would opine that no, and information security and IT should be different. They should be separate, but that depends on the size of the organization. It also depends on the maturity of the organization. I worked at an organization where information security was buried in IT. Like, they didn't even report to the CIO. It was buried in enterprise architecture because information security was being built from the ground up, and they were taking a more pragmatic approach to making it part of the architecture, which I liked that approach. They were embedding information security into the practices that they did, but they needed to mature, meaning they needed to have the good processes within the IT function before we could expand that to the full risk management function that we ideally, as information security practitioners, want. Now, over those years, we did work. We elevated information security within the IT function and within the business, and got it closer and more related with legal and risk. We got embedded with purchasing, but that was a crawl, walk, run approach with that organization. And in the article that I contributed to, I argued that information security probably should start in IT. If you're still blocking and tackling from a security perspective, if you don't have firewalls and you need to do that, then IT security probably needs to be, just that. It's IT security. It's not information security. It's not risk management. You're still blocking and tackling because the security mindset is not part of the IT function. It depends on the organization, but I think as the organization matures, the marriage of IT and information security tends to separate, because the security piece becomes embedded in the operations, and then the InfoSec or cyber piece becomes separate, becomes more about risk. But I'm going to share some stories of bringing IT governance and bringing IT together with InfoSec and how they can partner together. And so the first is with IT. And just as a practitioner, I feel that identity and access management is really key to a security program. You can say that, but you need firewall, you need blocking and tackling, you need SIM, you need encryption, and those types of things. And those, I agree. Those are table stakes. But when you have those basic, quote unquote, wall perimeter functionalities in there, the identity is the key. The likelihood of an organization of being attacked by nation state such that they're brute forcing and getting their way in through some vulnerability out there is lower. And even with script kiddies who are trying to get in, the soft squishy part of any organization is really the identity and the users. And so I used to argue with, and this is an example, I used to argue with my insurance providers about encryption of databases and encryption of information, especially at rest. And I would argue that, like, if someone can come in and break into my building, then break into my secure data center, and then power off without me noticing a server, de-rack it, and walk out, they win. If you can get that device such that you can then have access to the unencrypted drive, you win, because you've clearly earned that. It's much easier to compromise the credentials, the identity of my database administrator, and then you have access remotely. You don't have to break into anything. It's much easier to compromise the identity of a user. And so identity and access management is incredibly important. And so a way that information security can work with IT governance and enable the business. And when I say enable the business, I saw a recent post on LinkedIn, and can't remember where I saw it, but it was great because it said, if you're an enabler, the business can't operate or function without you. I think that's a bit extreme, but the point was, if you're truly enabling it, not having what you're providing will cause some pain. And so by enabling, you are adding to the services, you're adding to the function, you're not just a cost center. And an organization in the US here was able to leverage identity and access management to sell more product and solution. And the way they did that wasn't just with identity and access management of their internal customers. They leveraged their IAM platform for their external folks. So it wasn't just employees that were using single sign-on or some other identity and access management function. They brought that into where their customers were part of that IAM solution. What they were able to do was then better track what the customers were doing within their environment because of better IAM management, and they were able to better resell that information. And this organization, what they did is they hosted thousands of products and potential solutions. Companies will submit their product. This company then evaluates it, makes recommendations, and then posts it in their portal. Manufacturers can then log in, review that information, and download sheets and other information. Well, through the IAM platform, they were able to mine that information and better sell that back. And so by spending money in security, and they were able to enable the business to do that. Similarly, I don't have it listed here as a bullet point, but a lot of banks have been able to leverage their information security function for detecting fraud, and now they resell those services to outside organizations for detecting fraud within not just the bank, but with these other organizations, because their skill set has been able to do that to the point where cybersecurity is its own profit center. And so when they want to do an initiative, they have their own money and P&L from which to spend. The next example, the next story is lowering cyber insurance. And cyber insurance is obviously an important product to have, given that some of the expenses are quite drastic. And we hear about the news stories about these, the big mega breaches. The cost per record on those is pennies, if not fractions of pennies. The real hit on cyber insurance are the smaller breaches, the one that you don't hear about. It's the small doctor's office with 2 doctors and 3 medical assistants that ends up closing because of an event, because they can't recover. It's the architecture firm that gets hit and has some massive loss event. That's where you're really going to be leveraging that. And a lot of these firms, especially the smaller ones, the bigger ones, the Targets, the Sonys, et cetera, they can afford these premiums. And in fact, they could probably just self-insure. But smaller firms have to do a lot more, and they have to get better about that. And so, the marriage between IT governance and InfoSec, I think when it comes to lowering cyber insurance, is a 2-pronged approach. You have to do the external view and the internal view. I did this with an organization where we not only got renewal, because a lot of carriers aren't renewing organizations, and if they are, the premiums are going up. I was able to, through the practice I'm going to share in this story, not only get the renewal, but lower cyber security insurance by 27%. And so the approach is to look at it from the external point of view, and that's the way the insurers are going to look too. They're going to look at your environment from the external and make some decisions. They're hopefully going to ask you some underwriting questions as well. But those initial scans, if you have glaring errors, it's not going to look well. And some of it is the maturity of the cybersecurity organization. Like I had one, they scanned, they said, you have an open SIP port. And I'm like, well, yeah, I have VoIP phones. And they didn't like that. And there was nothing I could do about people who don't understand technology. But there's other things that you can do. And I'm not necessarily advocating for certain products, but for myself, I had used Security Scorecard. I had a free grant. to use some services through there just to see what they were looking at. Now you can say what you want about those solutions. They're not true risk management, but I tell you what, your cyber insurers are looking at that. Your partners are looking at those things, and a lot of those things are easy fixes. It can be something as simple as just add an SPF record. That really massively can increase your scores. Patching. There was one situation where there was a DNS record that was pointing to a server with our name attached to it, but it was managed by a vendor, and it was significantly unpatched, and we were able to work with that vendor to patch it. So not only were we enabling the business by lowering the risk, we were helping to protect our reputation and ultimately that vendors, but it was tied back to us. So fixing those external views. And then from the internal view, we used a metrics and tracking platform to provide visibility into our environment to make sure that we were doing good basic cyber hygiene, which is really what a lot of the cyber insurance organizations are looking for. Things like encryption in motion and multi-factor. There's been a huge push on 2FA with cyber insurance, and being able to show that within our own tracking platform. And so by putting these guardrails and rules around what we're doing to protect the organization as a whole and reduce cyber liability, we provided good practices to the organization. So, and then the next one is reducing risk and contingent liabilities. So contingent liabilities is a accounting term for potential and foreseen liabilities, expenses that you know about. And contingent liabilities can be warranty repair, so it's something that is foreseeable and you can estimate it. That's a contingent liability. So with warranty repair, you can say, look, we make washers and dryers, and we know that every year we get warranty repairs on those, and it equates to 2% of sales. So we're just going to create a line item in our liabilities that says 2% of sales is warranty. Pending lawsuits, when you say, look, we've got a pending lawsuit, there's a 25% chance of a $10 million loss, you can budget for that. You just put $2.5 million aside, you put it as a contingent liability, such that if it hits, you've planned for it, you budgeted for it. The SEC in the US, and I've argued that cybersecurity should be a contingent liability. It's definitely foreseeable. You can do some rough estimations. There's the Ponemon cost of data breach, which, the 2014 Verizon data breach incident report said, the cost of a data breach actually goes down significantly, almost exponentially, as the number of records increases. But the big mega breaches are less rare. We hear about those, but they don't happen as often as you think. It's the smaller breaches, and that's where Ponemon comes in and says, the cost of a record is $348, whatever it is, based on industry. And so you can do some rough estimations on your losses. You can do some good probability analysis on that to come up with those contingent liabilities. And that's where investment and reducing risk can come in. So if you say that we have a contingent liability based on cyber risk, now we're doing budget planning and we're helping the accountants and the overall IT, if InfoSec is still part of the IT governance function. When we're reducing the risk, you're reducing the contingent liability, you're reducing the likelihood, and you're reducing the potential impact. And so if you're budgeting for these things and you have a contingent liability, when you reduce that risk, you're taking it from a liability. And if you're familiar with the balance sheet, it shifts that from a liability to owner's equity. And then on the income statement, it goes from an expense straight down to the bottom to net income, because it's no longer an expense. That saved money becomes bottom line. Now, whether or not your CFO is going to go for it is an entirely different thing, but there is legal advice, and like I said, the SEC has been saying that it should show up. It's been showing up on 10Ks. As a footnote, at least, I'm definitely seeing more going concerns in 10Ks as well with respect to cyber. So I think people are catching on, like this is a thing and this is happening. And when you are planning for it, you can then use that risk reduction and those dollars to better show the value of what you're doing and what you're providing. So there's a couple of quick stories of bringing together some practical application of solutions of InfoSec and IT governance within organizations. So one of the questions that we get is, well, why should I have guardrails within my InfoSec program and presenting it, and really answering that what's in it for me question. And so I share with this is we have to be able to present information security and risk with respect to the way the audience wants to see it and the way that they're going to perceive that information. So I share this chart from some research that I did, and it's showing, or what the research study did was it presented risk and information security information in a tactical format, so very detailed, very granular, and it showed it in an aggregated format, more quote unquote business terms, so less technical, more, it was really just 6 metrics to say this is how we're relating to the business and answering to an executive or decision maker, what's in it for me. And what we found is that CISOs interpret tactical information and aggregate information exactly the same. We can get into the statistics of it all later, but just based on the screen here, right? The orange line and the blue lines are functionally on top of each other, and really the correlation coefficients was like 0.89 in both this scenario and the next one I'm going to show you. There was no difference. Now the executives, the hypothesis was that the executives would prefer the aggregate information, that they would not perceive risk the same as tactical. And it turns out the executives were functionally the same, except the 2 or 3 folks on the left-hand side there. Everyone else interpreted tactical and aggregate exactly the same. And so when we're having discussions and we're trying to align information security within the IT function, or within the rules to enable them, when we tie it back to the business, it doesn't matter how you do it with respect to the presentation format. What really matters is the story that you tell and the terms that you use. You've got to make sure that people care about what it is that you're saying, that it resonates with them. And what I've found is that if you're talking to counsel, it's about fines, finances, confidentiality of information. When you're talking to marketing, it's our reports accurate and our systems up and running? Are we, and is our reputation protected? And it's those types of concepts versus tactical bits and bytes and telling that different story. And that's what takes me into business terms. There are some schools of thought that business terms simply means finances or financial or accounting terms. And for certain businesses, I think that's true. I have this picture of an MBA on here because one piece of literature particularly said those with an MBA have a better time or an easier time of speaking with those with an MBA have better luck with, or more capable of speaking in business terms, which I thought was almost fun. I laughed when I read that because it's like that doesn't help at all define what it is. But I did find literature that pointed out that it's not always accounting, it's not always finance terms necessarily. Some of the quantitative folks will argue, well, everything can be rolled back to money. And yes, kind of, but is it meaningful? I've talked to a good handful of CFOs who have said that soft costs should be discounted. Those are sunk costs in their mind. And I'll give you an example. I had a situation of a malware incident at a computer lab within a school environment, and the computer labs were down for 2 weeks. It didn't impact our business. We were still able to teach the kids. Classes still happened. It was just a minor inconvenience that we couldn't use the computer labs for 2 weeks. So there was no impact to mission, no impact to business goals. There was no demand. It was just, it happened. We just had to wipe and reload the machines. And so the argument could be, well, your incident response was used up. Yeah, we had some productivity losses, but part of our budgeting and planning for the InfoSec team and those who had to respond is incident response. And so we didn't have to bring in anybody. We used our own staff. There was no loss. There was not a loss event. Overall, it was just an inconvenience. And so it's like, well, there's a financial net. Not really in that case. And that was the perspective of the business in that case. Now, other businesses would say, oh no, there absolutely is. I had to pay someone to come out and do it. Okay, was it planned? Was it budgeted? So what I found through my research is like, look, business terms is simply the terms of the business that you're in, which on the surface sounds incredibly vague. But here's the thing. If you're in healthcare, I'd be willing to bet that your business terms is patient outcomes, patient safety, and care to patients. And I'll give you an illustration of this. I worked at an organization that did organ recovery for transplant. And we had to increase our fees for kidney recovery. And so we went to the docs and we were like, hey, look, we're going to have to increase kidney recovery fees by like $7,000. And the doctor's like, I don't care. Zero impact to them in that change. And now the CEOs of the hospitals, those are the financials, they might care a little bit about that small increase. But the thing is, it was a non-event for the most part because it's about the outcomes and the survivability and results of those patients, of those recipients. I presented business cases in a healthcare organization where I computed NPV and IRR and used a 9% coupon, and they're like, this is a great financial situation, but what's the impact to saving lives? If we spend this $100,000 on this cybersecurity solution, what's the impact to saving lives? And so I had to change the story from this pure financial discussion, which again was a sound financial one, to saying that, by doing so, we'll improve uptime, which will make sure that we can fulfill our mission, etc. And so I had to flip the script. Now, that's not to say we'll make bad financial decisions, but rather the story itself, what resonated with those making those decisions was not necessarily the financial. What's the impact of the business? If you're in the business of educating kids, what are we doing to make sure that we are educating kids? Not necessarily pure dollars piece of it. If you're selling cars, right? Car dealership. Look, if we don't implement this solution, there's an increased risk that we'll go down. Therefore, we can't sell cars. You could say, well, yeah, that's a dollar argument. But is it? Because you're measuring the output of it's in terms of that. And then you could roll it back to dollars. Finance, banking, that tends to be about dollars and cents, and there's no getting around that one. So hopefully that helps a little bit. There's an argument, yes, that all rolls back. Time, people, and money is all just money. I have found that doesn't necessarily resonate. While true, that's not the same. So at the end of the day, here's some things that I encourage all of you to know. Know what type of business you're in, and that'll really help with not only your IT governance alignment, but being able to tailor InfoSec to what you do. And you'd be really surprised of the number of people and the number of organizations that can't answer that question in a unified fashion. And I worked at an organization and we were doing strategic planning, and the facilitator of the organization of the strategic planning section said, "What do you do here?" And the general manager came up and he's like, "We make pumps." And we did. We made peristaltic pumps. And the VP of sales, who reported to the general manager, said, "We make drives." And we instantly had a disconnect. It's hard to drive your organization if you don't have agreement on what it is that you do. And they were both right. So a peristaltic pump is two pieces. It's a box with a drive, and there's a pump head that you put on it that does the actual pumping of the peristaltic pump. It's the thing that actually goes around and pushes the fluid through the tube. And from the GM's perspective, we sold the drive and the pump head. That was a solution that we sold to the end user. And the VP of sales thought about it separately and differently and said, well, we make these drives in various pump head components that attach to the drives. And from there, we started thinking, well, if we're in the drive business, we can attach other things to these drives beyond pumps. And so then we started really getting into some good strategic discussions about growth and what else can we do, because we have these boxes that just make a circle and potentially can oscillate. What else can we do to add on to these devices? I was in an organization that was in what they said was healthcare space. But here's the thing: we didn't have any patients. We were in organ donation, but we didn't have patients. Well, yes, our nurses worked with donors, but that was more recovery. And when you really dug into it, we were a logistics company. We were about moving material from one point to another point. It was about recovering the organs, processing them, and getting them to a transplant surgeon who is going to take care of a patient and do health care. It's about bringing in surgeons. It's about logistics. It's about moving raw material. It's about moving product. And so we had to really have a nice discussion around what is it that we actually do. And we were actually a logistics organization, which changed the philosophy of how we operated from a governance perspective. What was most important to us. And in fact, my current organization now, actually, so I want to go with that. I'll go with a 3LC customer. One of their things is they're about enabling the fast movement of money, because they're in the trading world, and they know what type of business they're in. And the way they do that is with fast trading, low latency, and not negatively impacting the developers and the traders. By really understanding the business they're in, helps drive their governance. And so when they were rolling out 2FA, they took and evaluated the risk of slowing down trading and slowing down authentication and balancing the risk of authentication through 2FA, so to add that layer of security but not negatively impact the business, because they knew the level of business they're in, where that may be acceptable in a healthcare situation because the speed may not be absolutely necessary when charting. So, which will then drive the type of program that you develop and build, and allow you to align your program to support the business that you're in. Without fully understanding what it is that you actually do, you can't drive that. And here's my last example on that. Honda. Everyone's familiar with Honda, right? what does Honda do? And people say, well, Honda sells cars. It's true. Honda sells motorcycles. Also true. Honda sells lawnmowers. Also true. Wait a minute. Honda's in a whole bunch of things. They are, because Honda's in the small engine business, and they're around that function. That is what they do. They put those small engines in those products. They're not in the large engine business. You know, Honda does not make locomotives. They do not make engines for destroyer ships. They don't make big boat engines. They make small engines, cars, lawnmowers, motorcycles, small watercraft, etc. So what you're in will depend and help drive what it is that you do around your organization. I know I'm a little early on time because I was expecting to have a partner to co-present and also have ideas. So I'm going to open up to questions.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Edward, for presenting and delivering this very informative webinar. Just to remind the audience that PCB offers trainings and certification courses, which will show your dedication in managing IT governance and information security frameworks. And what's most importantly, you will get recognized worldwide. Now, without further ado, we'll go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees. The first question is, should IT security function in a modern organization report to the information security head or CISO?
I'm going to interpret that question as to the IT head versus the CISO.
Yes.
Okay, because the information, I would take the CISO as the information security head. So I really think that CISO reporting depends. It depends on the organization. I think it also really depends on the leader. If you have, so an issue with security, especially information security and risk management, reporting in to a CIO, it's a fox in the henhouse situation. They have competing priorities. And unless you have a truly solid CIO who understands risk management and the needs of information security, they can oftentimes overrule and trump the CISO. And then it's an uphill battle, and it's not necessarily healthy. When an organization is immature and you're still blocking and tackling, then I think it absolutely has to sit in there, because now your CIO is potentially just advocating for those easy to do items, those table stake, even considering, the CIS 18, what is it that I think is the first 9 are your table stakes. Those are your tier 1. You just kind of got to do these basic hygiene things. I can't think of any CIO who would argue against CIS number 1, right? Which is hardware inventory. From a security perspective, you want to know where your assets are. From a CIO perspective, I want to know where my assets are. I want to know what I have. I've invested money in this. I need to be able to know what stuff is. So both are in agreement. And then the next one is software inventory. What's in the environment? So not only from a security perspective, just from an operations perspective, they're not at odds. It's when you get into CIS 18 and you're like, hey, we need to do a pen test. And the CIO is like, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to spend the money. And now you got to get someone else involved and say, look, there's some compliance reasons for it. There's some risk management pieces for it. There's lots of reasons to do that, but the CIO doesn't necessarily want to get caught with their pants down because the pen test is potentially going to reveal that. You also get that type of thing where it's like, I'm going to bring in metrics as the CISO person. The CIO is like, no, because it's going to make me look bad. No, it's just data. Nothing's making you look bad. We're just gathering information here. So I think it depends. The answer to the question is it depends. It depends on the maturity. It depends on the readiness of the organization. In a perfect world, it lives outside from the beginning, but most leaders in most organizations aren't going to do that. They're going to have it start off in IT and then eventually move it out to either legal or finance, which that's a bad situation too, because the CFO is not necessarily going to spend the money on it unless they are a truly risk-based person. A risk officer, if the organization is big enough, people will say, well, to the CEO. I think that depends on the organization and the CEO. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Edward. Okay, another question is how does personal data protection align with IT governance and IT security?
Personal data protection it's a subset of information security. I mean, some will argue though that that's the whole goal. It's not. It's a part of it. I mean, there's so many things that we are protecting with respect to information. We're protecting IP. We're protecting customer data, which you could say is personal. We're protecting employee data. We're protecting availability of systems, which is the ability of a system to function. You think about the ransomware event that shuts down a hospital, right? No data is necessarily stolen, so you don't have a loss of personal data, but you've got a loss of availability, which is a loss of services. And then, there was a death attributed to a ransomware event because of someone couldn't get the services that they needed. So where does it align? I think it becomes part of the mix and what is valuable to your business with respect to that. There are some businesses that rate reputation over confidentiality of information. They will say that their reputation is more important than necessarily protecting the information. Protecting the information ends up being a byproduct of them protecting their reputation. And so, yeah, where does it fit in? It depends on the business that you're in and what your business values from a prioritization perspective.
Thank you, Edward. Okay, another question is it a good idea to tailor information security awareness trainings differently depending on the people it would be delivered to in order to ensure the correct business terms are being used for the target audience, maybe?
Yes. If you are not in healthcare, don't do HIPAA training, right? If you don't have EPHI, don't include it in your HIPAA training and in your security training. It again goes back to business terms. Use the terms that are used in your business with respect to security awareness training, which is different than anti-phishing training, because those are just going to come fast and furious no matter what. But when you're actually training, use the terms that your business uses. You want the vernacular to feel comfortable. So here, there's a handful of studies done, and the crux of these studies is that when people hear the word cyber or cybersecurity, they instantly go negative, and there's an affective or emotional response to the terms and word cybersecurity. So as soon as you put in front of a layperson, we're going to do cybersecurity training, they're instantly going negative and rolling their eyes and just thinking about the drudgery of this. And so we have to, as practitioners, answer the what's in it for me question of like, why do I need to do this? And then using terms that are comfortable for them. And that's when I go back to that business term slide. If we're talking bits and bytes and trying to, basically FUD them, it's not going to work. But if we tie it back to what we're doing, I'm like, hey, we're trying to educate kids. We're trying to sell more cars. We're trying to improve patient outcomes. People are going to get on board with that stuff. If we just say you need to not click on things because I said so as the all-knowing wizard of CISO land, it's not going to work. It has to be done in terms that the people understand. And so, yes, absolutely tailor your training to the business that you're in, but use the stuff that's appropriate. If you are in a health situation and there are people who never deal with health data, they probably don't need that level of training. But your practitioners and your clinicians, do. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Okay, another question is what are some common challenges faced by organizations in implementing IT governance and information security initiatives?
I think one of the biggest challenges is the prioritization list. You know, regardless of when you come into an organization, and I'm doing this right now with my new org. I'm brought in as the first CIO for this organization, and we just have a list of stuff that we're looking at doing to improve our risk posture and standardize operations within the IT function, creating standard work across the enterprise, creating repeatable processes to again gain those efficiencies. And it's the prioritization list, because we, like many other organizations, don't have an unlimited piggy bank. And so we have to do it in a very purposeful manner. And I think that's probably one of the biggest struggles. I think company culture is always the uphill battle. I remember talking to the CISO of a major insurance company, and he got up and he shared about all his initiatives and all the great, wonderful things he was doing. Like, everyone in the audience was completely jealous. They're like, dang, man, you just killed it. Like, you got to do everything every CISO has ever wanted to do. And I talked to him afterwards, and I was like, how'd you do it? How'd you get the support? Because that's the thing I'm always wondering. This is kind of what this question is asking is, what did you do to convince your organization to support you and do the things that you just presented? Because this is all the right stuff. And he shared with me that it wasn't him. And it's like, wait a minute, but you're the CISO, you're the guy. You just got up on stage and talked for 45 minutes about how awesome things are. Yeah. Turns out the CEO's daughter was in information security, and she put a bug in his ear, and he was like, oh yeah. So the CEO comes in one day, talks to the CISO and says, what do you need? And then he got it. I was like, oh, you cheated. I do have one case where the CISO from a cosmetic organization got what she needed because audit came in and said, y'all got problems. And audit told the board that. And so when the audit went to the CISO, they're like, audit just said that, we got problems. And she was like, yeah, I know, I've been telling you this for years. And well, because audit said it, they're like, what do you need? And she goes, well, I already told you, I need, $3 million, whatever she said she needed. And the board went, fine. And for the next 3 years, she reported out on her progress on that. And now she'd actually only reports to the board once a year, because they're like, we feel better. You've got this. And she was handling it and got everything she needed. So, hopefully that answers your question. Happy to expand or clarify.
Yes, okay, and the last question for today is how can we keep track of the user access and make sure it's in line with IT governance in a software as a service startup with a small IT team?
So was the first part of the question about user access?
Yeah, how can we keep track of the user access and make sure it's in line with IT governance?
So your IT governance is going to define what you're going to keep track of, and maybe not necessarily how or what technology to use, but the governance is going to create the rules. And so when I start an organization, I like to review the IT policies that are in place and realign them with security in mind. And so, like with one organization, I aligned the entire security program with NIST 853, and at the time R4, moderate or higher, and everything we did, every policy, every rule had to align back to one of those controls. And if we needed, like we created a picture, a photo sharing policy. We then baked that into, I think it was the media control within NIST 853, because that's where that fit. And so now I had the rules in place aligned with a framework and then mapped back to HIPAA because we were a health organization. And so how do you manage the user access? First, you create the rules on what users should be accessing and how they should be using it. And then from a monitoring perspective, there are tools and platforms that will monitor accounts out there. I'm going to try and stay vendor agnostic on that. Privilege access control is definitely one to look at because then that makes sure that those users are where they should be. Audit trails and logging of who's accessing what, especially in your cloud environments. Make sure that stuff's turned on. I don't know how many times I've gone into organizations, either as a practitioner or as a consultant, and their logging's not turned on. And they have no centralization of audit trails. And so, and they're not keeping them very long. Well, it's hard to figure out who's accessing what if you don't record it. You've got to be able to do that. And there's actually lots of compliance reasons to track user access to items. That is something a lot of the cloud solutions have done a really good job of, is keeping track of who's accessing what and when. In a basic on-prem solution, there tends to be less of that logging and access, other than who has access to those types of things. And there's lots of tools even for basic NTFS type permissions to be able to see who has access to what. But here's the thing, you should be auditing that periodically too. In fact, I think SOX, Sarbanes actually requires you to do that quarterly. That's always a challenge too, because that's not defined of who should access what. And that's, again, goes to governance of documenting what a share is, documenting who should have access to those shares, and being able to have the discussion with those business owners of who should have access to those things. Whether or not they are accessing it is a function of logging and being able to put that in there. And again, the cloud solution providers have done a great job with that. I know G Suite has done that. Office 365 has done a good job about who's accessing what and when. But you got to turn it on. Like I recall working in one HRMS system where you could do a lot in there and they didn't log anything, which was scary because you could mess up a lot. And that service itself didn't have that functionality. So make sure when you're onboarding, you're doing your vendor risk assessment, that is something that is possible.
Okay, Edward, thanks one more time for delivering the webinar today, and thanks to everyone who has joined us today. Have a great day ahead.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Thank you.